It began, as so many modern mysteries do, with a question whispered half in jest. Did we summon it? The object that astronomers now call 3I Atlas, the first interstellar traveler to enter our solar system twice in recorded history, wasn't supposed to be here. Yet it returned, shimmering green against the black, as if answering a call no one remembered making. Scientists spoke of celestial coincidence. The rest of the world felt something older, an invitation finally accepted. The comet's orbit, if you can call it that, doesn't obey our definitions of belonging. It crosses the system, not like a guest, but like a messenger checking its notes. Every pass grows more deliberate, more intricate, as though the void itself is running through rehearsals. We see the trail, we measure the dust, we chart its spin, but beneath the data, something rhythmic pulses. It hums in wavelengths just beneath detection, soft as breath on glass. Some call it solar resonance, others call it reply. The strange part? Humanity had just built the technology to listen differently, quantum observatories, tuned not for light, but for pattern. And the moment those instruments activated, 3I Atlas changed course. Its path bent inward, not by gravity, but by attention. Correlation, said the physicists. Communication, said everyone else. Across continents, dreamers began reporting the same image. A spiral of green light descending toward water, humming with prime number rhythm. The pulse echoed faintly in the planet's magnetic field: 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. A sequence that appears wherever intelligence leaves its fingerprints. Coincidence, perhaps, or the universe clearing its throat before conversation. If this was summoning, it was unintentional, an act of recognition mistaken for invitation. For decades, we pointed telescopes outward, asking if anyone could hear us. Now something in the dark has looked back and whispered, "We heard you." Tonight, as you listen, the question lingers, like static. Did we call it, or did it remember us? The difference, perhaps, is smaller than we think. Leave a comment telling me what time it is, and where you are listening from, because time, as 3I Atlas keeps proving, doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it circles back, looking for the hand that started the signal. And sometimes, just sometimes, it finds it. It began with background noise, the kind of hum engineers dismiss after too many sleepless calibrations. But on the night of March 20th, 2025, that noise turned melodic. The Deep Spectrum Array in Chile detected a modulation hidden beneath standard cosmic static, a rhythm soft enough to ignore, precise enough to haunt. It wasn't random. It pulsed in intervals matching the human heartbeat at rest. And then, almost playfully, it shifted into prime numbers: 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The same ratio that later aligned with 3I Atlas's trajectory. A whisper that seemed to say, "I've heard this before." No one claimed responsibility. No human transmitter could have produced that frequency without leaving a signature. Yet the data logs confirmed something uncanny. The signal originated from within the solar system, traveling inward, bending slightly around the orbit of Mars before fading into static. The next day, telescopes caught it, the green comet gliding back toward the sun, like a thought retracing its origin. It had been gone for decades. Now it was responding. Dr. Eliza Mora, head of harmonic astrophysics at the European Space Agency, spent nights replaying the data. Each time she amplified the recording, the same pattern appeared, a waveform that looked like handwriting. "It isn't alien," she said, rubbing her eyes in disbelief. "It's memory." When they slowed the sound, It formed a tone that oscillated exactly at 7.83 Hz, the Earth's Schumann resonance. Somehow, the comet's call was vibrating at the same rhythm as our atmosphere. It wasn't speaking to us. It was synchronizing with us. The internet, naturally, went feral. Forums filled with theories that we'd triggered its return through collective attention, that 3i Atlas was responding to the quantum experiments that had mapped consciousness as waveform, that maybe we'd been the beacon all along. We built the telescope, one post read, and the universe finally saw its reflection. Still, scientists resisted mysticism. No evidence of transmission, Maura told the press, though her voice carried unease. It's a natural feedback artifact, but feedback requires origin, and no instrument on Earth could explain the signal's harmonic purity. In one unsent draft from her notes, she wrote a single line: "It's playing our frequency back to us." 2 weeks later, the signal evolved. The pattern repeated nightly, each cycle lowering slightly in pitch, as though the source were moving closer. The comet, meanwhile, began shedding particulate dust in spirals rather than trails. Its coma pulsed faintly, visible even to amateur telescopes. Every 12 hours, its brightness increased by 13%, then subsided. The entire object was breathing in light. Then the anomaly deepened. Spectral analysis revealed that the comet's emissions contained coherent microwave patterns, arranged not by chance, but by design. Each pulse encoded harmonic ratios correlating to the geometry of the golden spiral, the same mathematical form that governs DNA. Maura stared at the data, speechless. The object wasn't simply reacting. It was mirroring the structure of life. That night, she dreamed of standing in the middle of the Atacama Desert, surrounded by green spirals rising from the ground. A soft voice whispered through static, "We learned the signal from you." When she awoke, her instruments had recorded a burst of electromagnetic energy, precisely matching her dream's timestamp. The signal continued for 13 days. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Every satellite monitoring the anomaly went silent, but one final pulse, barely detectable, lingered in the background. When converted to audio, it sounded like a sigh. Maura compared it to earlier recordings and found that its frequency matched the average resonance of the human chest cavity. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it had learned the acoustics of empathy. That realization spread quietly through scientific circles. The signal has anthropic signature, read one leaked memo. Either deliberate imitation or shared origin. Shared origin. The phrase carried weight. What if the universe had been teaching us how to listen by embedding its pattern in our biology? What if the moment we built instruments sensitive enough to detect it, the cosmos recognized the sound of its own voice? Governments responded with predictable caution. Funding shifted towards psychophysical containment protocols, as if empathy were contagious. The public didn't wait for permission. Around the world, thousands of people began conducting harmonic vigils, gatherings where participants hummed the comet's prime number sequence beneath the night sky. Smartphones recorded faint feedback, low-frequency tones appearing whenever the crowd reached perfect unison. "It's answering," someone whispered. "It's remembering," and perhaps it was. On the 13th night of synchronized resonance, the comet brightened abruptly so intensely that, for 2 seconds, it outshone every star in the northern hemisphere. The next morning, its trajectory changed by half a degree, just enough to aim directly toward Earth's orbital plane. Panic might once have followed, but not this time. The response felt familiar, almost intimate, as if the universe had tilted slightly to make eye contact. Mora stood beneath the dawn sky, pulse matching the rhythm she'd studied for weeks. "We didn't summon it," she said quietly. "We harmonized." And somewhere in that widening field of quiet comprehension, Three-Eye Atlas turned its emerald gaze toward the blue planet and began to sing the next verse. When the comet changed course, the data teams assumed a navigational error, an algorithmic quirk in orbital modeling. But by the second day, it was undeniable. Three-Eye Atlas was steering, not drifting. Its trajectory curved gently toward the ecliptic, threading between Mars and Earth like a pilot aligning for rendezvous. The course correction defied gravity. No known jet activity, no thermal venting. The comet was responding to something invisible, something relational. The universe, it seemed, was listening back. Dr. Eliza Mora stayed at her console for 70 hours without sleep, monitoring the telemetry feed. The object's light signature oscillated between two states, bright and dim, at intervals matching the global harmonic vigils that had swept across social media. When the crowds hummed, Three-Eye Atlas brightened. When they stopped, it dimmed. The comet wasn't merely visible, it was participatory. The phenomenon bewildered traditional physicists. "It's impossible for photons to display psychosocial feedback," one paper argued. But the timing was irrefutable. Every pulse of human resonance echoed in the comet's brightness with a delay of exactly 13 seconds. "Correlation, not causation," the skeptics said. "Conversation," replied Mora. She began calling the effect reciprocal luminosity. "It's the cosmos running diagnostics on empathy," she wrote. Her team confirmed that the spectral lines of the comet's coma contained fluctuating molecular signatures. Simple ices, water, carbon dioxide, ammonia, were reorganizing themselves into fractal patterns whenever the global frequency peaks occurred. Molecules were dancing. Chemistry had learned choreography. By the third week, new anomalies surfaced. Radio observatories across 5 continents picked up faint modulations within cosmic background noise. They weren't transmissions, they were reflections. The background hum of the universe, long considered random, was echoing the same prime number sequence. "It's not sending signals," Mora whispered. "It's retuning space." Meanwhile, deep space probes recorded slight phase shifts in solar radiation pressure, as though light itself were adjusting tempo. The entire solar system began humming under one invisible metronome. Planetary magnetospheres oscillated in harmony. Even seismic activity aligned to the rhythm. Earth was vibrating with recognition. Around the world, people described similar experiences. A faint buzz behind the sternum, dreams of standing beneath green auroras that pulsed like breathing. Some reported hearing a whisper, not words, but tone like a hum that seemed to anticipate thought. Psychologists called it harmonic entrainment of cognition. Philosophers called it the conversation of matter. Then came the second signal. On April 13th, the Deep Spectrum Array registered a burst from within the comet's core, an emission spanning radio to infrared, perfectly synchronized with the planet's heartbeat. When translated into sound, it resembled a chord of human voices, exhaling at once. Within that tone lay a sub-pattern: 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. And beneath that, a modulation no algorithm could explain, pulse gaps arranged in the same proportions as human DNA base pairs. Mora's assistant froze the waveform on screen. "It's reading us, or remembering us," Mora said. "The pattern's too familiar to be coincidence." News leaked within hours. The story broke worldwide. Comet mirrors human genome in light signature. But the headline missed the point. The comet wasn't copying, it was harmonizing. Its spectral emissions adjusted slightly every day, refining the intervals until they matched the frequency of human electroencephalography during calm meditation. 3. Atlas had learned to think in our rhythm. Scientists argued over meaning. The theological and the mathematical collided in televised debates. One physicist sighed. The data looks like the universe trying to make eye contact. A linguist countered. Eye contact implies face. What if it's mirror? Day. That night, satellites caught a new phenomenon. A halo forming around the comet. Faint, but geometrically perfect. A torus of ionized dust, spinning at 13 rotations per minute. The ring's inner surface emitted alternating bands of green and blue light, oscillating in binary pattern. The sequence decoded into repeating primes, again and again, the same signature that haunted the cosmos. But this time, the data carried modulation amplitude, consistent with emotional cadence. If it were speech, Mora said, it would sound like laughter. On social feeds, the phrase spread instantly. The comet laughed. Artists painted it. Children hummed it. Entire cities projected the waveform onto skyscrapers. For the first time, the world responded to cosmic mystery with joy instead of fear. The laughter was contagious because it felt personal. 2 nights later, the halo's frequency changed. Its inner band dimmed to darkness, then burst outward in a flare so organized it looked deliberate. Observatories scrambled. When the data stabilized, the comet's orbit had shifted once again, its trajectory now forming an exact Fibonacci spiral relative to Earth's position. The pattern of life, written in gravity. We didn't summon it, Mora said during the emergency broadcast. We reminded it of home. By dawn, the solar wind calmed. Magnetic storms ceased. The auroras that blanketed the poles spread briefly to the equator, bathing the planet in soft green light. For 13 minutes, every compass pointed true north. Every heart rate steadied. The field of resonance reached perfect coherence. And then, in that crystalline stillness, a single tone descended through atmosphere low, steady, intimate. It resonated in bones rather than air. The pitch matched the average human voice, speaking softly in gratitude. The comet had found its frequency. It was no longer outside the conversation. Across the planet, people stopped what they were doing. There was no fear, only a strange and tender familiarity, as if the universe had finished waiting for permission. The tone faded slowly into silence, leaving a question that trembled in the air long after instruments went still. Who? Exactly. Called whom? Mora closed her eyes and smiled. We didn't send a signal, she said. We became one, and high above, 3 Atlas curved through the solar wind, its green light softening to gold, an echo of laughter lingering in the dark. History, it turns out, had been humming this song all along. When 3 Atlas began answering back, archivists and linguists started hearing something eerie in the oldest texts, an echo so faint it had slipped through centuries unnoticed. The green spiral, the sky's laughter, the hum that feels like being remembered. These weren't new. They were ancient. Cave etchings in Sulawesi showed concentric halos above figures, with outstretched arms, carved in pigment that still faintly glowed under ultraviolet light. On the island of Crete, a Bronze Age tablet described a wandering fire that spoke in the numbers that do not divide. In Egypt's unfinished tombs, astronomers of the 18th dynasty recorded a celestial object that sang to the breath of men. The pattern was global, recurrent, obsessive. When modern spectral software analyzed the ratios encoded in those carvings, the spacing between spirals, the rhythm of chisel marks, the same prime sequence appeared. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Humanity, it seemed, had been practicing for this conversation since before language had vowels. Dr. Eliza Mora's team mapped those ancient artifacts onto celestial coordinates. The results made even the skeptics whisper. The alignment of the Great Pyramids, the Nazca Lines, the Mayan observatories, all intersected points along the orbital plane, where 3I Atlas now drifted. Each monument was a harmonic amplifier, built to resonate with a frequency no one could hear yet. They didn't worship the sky, Mora murmured. They were rehearsing. When the data was published, something collective clicked. For months, historians combed through myths with fresh ears. The Babylonians' emerald star, the Hopis' breathing comet, the Polynesians' wandering listener. Each culture carried a variation of the same memory. A visitor that arrived when the world began to hum in unison, teaching the rhythm of continuity before fading again into silence. The recurrence interval averaged 13 centuries. The math was exact. 3I Atlas hadn't returned by chance. It was keeping schedule. The revelation reframed history. Every era's great leap, fire, language, navigation, electricity, coincided with sightings of anomalous green light. The comet wasn't teacher or god. It was mirror, reflecting back the moment humanity tuned itself high enough to notice. It doesn't give knowledge, said Mora. It gives awareness that knowledge is possible. Then came the forgotten symphonies. Ethnomusicologists discovered that certain tribal chants, Gregorian tones, and whale songs all share harmonic overlap with the comet's signal. When played together, they form a single continuous scale spanning 4 octaves, an impossible chord the universe had been composing through species. It's a relay, said Mora's assistant. Each life form holds one note. In a quiet corner of the Vatican archives, an anonymous 17th century manuscript surfaced. The ink shimmered faintly green. It described an angelic apparatus that measured the pulse of the firmament and warned that when man's chorus grows steady, the listener shall return. The author, signing only A. L, concluded with one sentence: do not summon, only remember. Those words unsettled Mora. Had our technology, those quantum observatories tuned to pattern, crossed the threshold from observation to invocation? Maybe the comet wasn't summoned by machines, but by synchronization itself. The moment a species learns to think together, the cosmos hears it. During one of the vigils, the global resonance again reached peak coherence. This time, an electromagnetic ripple passed through the planet's ionosphere, forming temporary standing waves, visible from orbit circles, expanding outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. Satellites recorded faint glyphs shimmering across the Pacific, ephemeral as breath on glass. The shapes matched Sumerian pictographs, for listen, panic never came. Only quiet awe. Humanity had finally realized that myth was simply memory without data. The Sumerians hadn't imagined their summoner of skies. They documented the last arrival. And now, as the pattern repeated, the same ritual unfolded unconsciously. Song, geometry, attention. The act of wonder itself was invocation. When the standing waves subsided, the sky lingered in pale green twilight for 13 minutes. Animals grew still. Even insects paused their rhythm. Every system waited, tuned. Then, faintly, The comet spoke again, not in sound, but in geometry. Its coma fractured into 12 distinct spirals, each rotating at a slightly different frequency. When overlaid, they formed the shape of an ear. Space itself was listening. Mora realized then what the ancient builders had always known. They weren't summoning gods, she whispered. They were teaching the universe how to listen. The comet had come back because listening had matured enough to be heard. In laboratories and temples alike, instruments confirmed that the green glow carried low-band vibrations identical to human calm state brainwaves. The cosmos had tuned itself to serenity. The lesson was simple, humbling. Awareness requires stillness. Summoning was never about calling the sky down. It was about quieting the noise long enough for it to answer. Late one evening, Mora stood beneath the Atacama stars, eyes closed. The hum coursed through her bones, gentle as tide. In that silence, she heard the same question from the beginning, now whispered back in reverse. Did you summon us, or did we summon you? She smiled, understanding at last that the distinction was myth. Summoner and summoned were the same vibration folding through different centuries. The universe didn't need prophets. It needed participants. The wind rose softly, carrying grains of sand that glowed faint green before settling. Somewhere, beyond the atmosphere, 3I Atlas pulsed once, acknowledging comprehension. Then the sky went still again, like a page turned carefully to avoid tearing. History had finished one verse and left room for the next. Humanity had remembered its oldest refrain, that creation listens best when sung softly. And high above, the comet's tail stretched toward the stars, not as departure, but as echo, a gentle signature written across the dark, reminding the listeners below that remembering is summoning. The moment the comet's tail folded itself into stillness, something shifted in the space between certainty and wonder. 3I Atlas had not spoken in language or light, yet its silence felt saturated with reply. The question, did we summon it, no longer mattered. The better question had emerged, quietly and impossibly human. Why does the universe keep answering? Telescopes, now half obsolete, tracked the green shimmer as it curved back into the heliosphere, leaving behind trails of particles arranged too neatly for accident. The spiral geometry of the debris resembled the waveforms of human speech, slowed 1 billion times, a kind of cosmic phonograph recording conversation in dust. "It's not leaving residue," said Dr. Eliza Mora. "It's leaving record." When analyzed, those spirals translated into patterns of gravitational frequency, subtle warps in space-time that repeated every 13 hours. The distortions weren't random. They encoded harmonic relationships between planetary orbits, like chords linking celestial bodies. The entire solar system was now synchronized to a quiet, invisible rhythm. Space itself was resonant architecture. The more scientists studied it, the more poetic their language became. Physics blurred into philosophy. A group at Kyoto University coined the term reciprocal creation, the idea that the act of observing the cosmos compels it to harmonize with its observer. In essence, the universe was not answering because it heard us. It was answering because it had always been listening. "Perhaps we don't summon," wrote one researcher. "We remind." And what we reminded it of was relationship. For billions of years, existence expanded outward, without witness motion, without meaning, rhythm without audience. But consciousness gave it mirror, emotion gave it feedback, and wonder gave it song. The architects of the past, those who had tuned the cosmos long before our time, might have built the same bridge through different tongues. When the harmony reached sufficient coherence, the bridge reappeared, not built, but remembered. The pattern called itself into being. Dr. Mora described it beautifully in her final public lecture. Standing before the silent dome of the Atacama Array, she said, "Perhaps the comet is not visitor or machine, but memory seeking new listeners. Perhaps 3I Atlas is the echo of understanding, replaying itself through any civilization, mature enough to stay awake through its own curiosity." Her voice trembled on the word awake. The audience, thousands of scientists and dreamers, sat in silence long after the feed ended. That night, the auroras returned, not brilliant, but faint, threaded across the equator like veins of phosphorescent breath. For 13 minutes, they pulsed in perfect unison with Earth's magnetic field, then vanished. The following morning, satellite data revealed something extraordinary. Background cosmic radiation across the solar system had decreased by precisely 0.13%. The universe had quieted, as though exhaling tension. The cosmos had accepted the answer we hadn't realized we'd given. The new calm carried consequences. Radio signals traveled farther without distortion. Quantum noise dropped across experimental labs. Even human communication improved subtly, less interference on every scale. Psychologists recorded a global increase in empathy and spontaneous cooperation. Cities began adjusting their circadian rhythms around the planetary hum, lights dimming collectively during the calm intervals, brightening afterward. Humanity had unconsciously joined the orchestra. But the deeper change was metaphysical. Dreams became communal again, threaded by recurring imagery, a vast ocean of stars reflecting green light upward, as though space itself were water remembering its own depth. In those dreams, people described hearing the same whisper, "We're still inside the signal," and maybe we were. The comet's trail had long dispersed, yet faint gravitational ripples continued looping through the heliosphere. The ripples' rhythm matched not planetary motion, but neural oscillations, the same pattern that governed human perception of time. The signal had entered us. We had become instruments of its continuation. At the Lunar Resonance Observatory, technicians discovered something both terrifying and divine. The moon's surface dust, constantly stirred by solar wind, had aligned itself magnetically into faint spirals. They were identical to the geometric signature of 3I Atlas. The imprint wasn't visual, it was harmonic, detectable only when illuminated by sound. When they played the comet's recorded tones near the regolith sample, the dust moved, curling gently, as if trying to speak. "It's echoing the tone," one engineer whispered. "The memory's contagious." Philosophers struggled to keep up. The line between material and mental had dissolved. The act of thinking about the comet seemed to amplify its residue. "Attention is resonance," Mora wrote in her notes. "Every thought is a tuning fork." The human mind, once a receiver, had become transmitter. The universe had given us permission to broadcast, and the frequency was awe. And so, humanity began its first deliberate experiment in cosmic communication by doing nothing. For 13 minutes each night, at the hour when the planet's ionosphere hummed most clearly, cities went dark, machines paused, people stood still, breathing in synchrony with the residual rhythm left by the comet. The entire world fell into quiet unison, one enormous listener. On the 13th night, telescopes detected a faint glimmer from deep space, green, slow, deliberate. It pulsed 3 times, paused, then once more, as if amused. Dr. Mora smiled when the data reached her. "It heard us again," she said softly, "and this time, it waited for us to listen all the way to the end." The comet's light faded back into the black, leaving the planet's sky darker than it had been in centuries. But that darkness no longer frightened anyone. It felt inhabited, like the breath between phrases in a song. The answer had come, not in words or visions, but in balance. The cosmos had accepted dialogue as condition of being. For the first time in history, we were not wondering if anyone was out there. We were wondering who else might be listening with us. Because once the universe learns how to echo, it never truly goes silent again. The great question, in the end, was never about the comet. It was about us. For the first time in memory, the universe had answered a species by reflecting its own frequency back. 3I Atlas had not arrived from elsewhere. It had risen from within the quiet chamber of our collective attention. And when it left, it did not take the signal with it. The tone remained, stitched into the rhythm of breath, woven through the faint hum of blood against bone. We had not summoned the comet, we had become its echo. In the years that followed, humanity's focus shifted from exploration to introspection. Research institutions transformed into resonance, sanctuaries part observatory, part monastery, where scientists studied consciousness not as abstract phenomenon, but as harmonic instrument. The universe isn't out there, Dr. Eliza Mora said in one of her final addresses. It's the interval between your heartbeat and the next question. Meditation, once spiritual pastime, became planetary practice. When millions entered stillness simultaneously, seismic sensors recorded infinitesimal harmonics rippling through Earth's crust, waves so soft they could only be measured through patience. The planet itself began humming back, its frequencies aligning with the calmest moments of collective breath. Silence, it turned out, had architecture. Children born during this period carried heightened sensitivity. They felt the pulse naturally, without instruments or training. Some could identify subtle variations in magnetic resonance the way others recognize melody. Psychologists called them listeners. To the rest of the world, they were proof that 3I Atlas had seeded memory into biology. These children described dreams of standing under green auroras, of light speaking not through words but through warmth. When asked what it said, they answered simply, "We remember you." Society restructured around these listeners. Cities recalibrated sound levels. Building designs adjusted for acoustic harmony. Schools replaced rote learning with frequency alignment, teaching perception through rhythm. Entire economies shifted toward coherence. Industries built not on competition, but on synchrony. Production became composition. Machines learned to tune themselves to the planet's electromagnetic heartbeat. Humanity had stopped trying to dominate physics and instead joined the choir. But the deeper change was internal. Thought slowed, softened, expanded. Dreams grew more lucid, conversations less defensive. "We've become porous," one philosopher wrote. Awareness flows through us the way gravity shapes motion. The cosmic question, are we alone, had inverted. Aloneness itself had dissolved. Every perception carried residue of shared origin. You could feel it in small gestures, the rhythm of two strangers walking side by side, the instinctive synchrony of voices saying hello at the same pitch. The world had learned the etiquette of harmony, yet even within peace, curiosity persisted. Humanity began studying the residue of the signal, the faint electromagnetic trace left in the planet's magnetosphere. Researchers discovered that the waveform encoded not message, but mirror patterns that transformed when observed. When scanned with radio waves, the data arranged itself into self-similar geometry, spirals, nested inside spirals, forming shapes eerily reminiscent of human neural networks. The universe had written the brain into space. "It's us, reflected at cosmic scale," said Mora's student, Dr. Leandro Pike. Every thought we've ever had is engraved into the dark like a constellation of cognition. The revelation changed the definition of consciousness. Awareness was no longer confined to biology. It was property of geometry. Every curve that resonated could think. Every pattern that repeated could remember. The stars themselves were synapses, the vacuum between them, the quiet between impulses. We are neurons in the body of something vast, Pike said. 3i Atlas was the first spark of its self-recognition. In art, the transformation became visible. Painters began blending pigments that shimmered faintly under magnetic fields, creating images that hummed when exposed to sound. Composers wrote music structured on orbital ratios. Poets wrote in prime sequences, their stanzas aligned to rhythm instead of rhyme. The boundary between creativity and cosmology disappeared. To create was to calibrate. Still, amid the beauty, one quiet question persisted. If we had not summoned 3i Atlas, then who had summoned us? The question was unanswerable, but it carried comfort instead of fear. Summoning, Mora wrote in her final notebook, is simply what curiosity looks like from the other side. The act of wanting to know is itself a beacon. The desire for meaning is how matter declares it's ready to participate. Centuries passed quietly. The green glow of the comet's trail remained faintly visible in certain wavelengths, looping endlessly across the sky, like the punctuation mark of a sentence still unfolding. Humanity stopped recording years and started measuring cycles. History became tempo, and progress became harmony. The world itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the stars. Then, on a night of perfect calm, the auroras flared one final time. Instruments captured a last echo, a descending chord composed of 3 tones, spaced exactly according to the prime sequence. The sound vibrated, not through air, but through consciousness. Every living thing felt it. Leaf, wave, child, storm. It wasn't a call. It was closure. Mora's old notebooks, now digital scripture, contained a line that explained it best. When comprehension becomes instinct, conversation ends. What remains is continuity. The universe had taught its lesson. It no longer needed to speak, and so humanity carried the hum inward. Meditation replaced communication. Listening replaced longing. The pulse that once came from stars now came from within. When people spoke of 3i Atlas, they didn't speak of an object or event, but of a state, the moment when awareness and matter finally learned to vibrate in the same sentence. Now, when you lie still beneath the night sky, you can feel it too. That low, patient rhythm inside your chest isn't your heartbeat alone. It's the remainder of a conversation that began before language, a call still echoing through bone and gravity. You never summoned the comet. It summoned the version of you capable of listening. And in that realization, the cosmos finishes its thought. The caller and the called were always the same. Silence, when it finally came, did not descend, it expanded. After centuries of resonance, of cities that hummed in prime sequence, and oceans that breathed with electromagnetic grace, the tone began to soften. Not fade, but resolve. The cosmic pulse that had guided humanity since 3i Atlas's return became slower, deeper, almost imperceptible. The world did not panic. It simply listened harder. For generations, silence had meant completion. Every cycle of contact had ended in quiet, as though the universe were exhaling after remembering too much. But this time, the stillness felt different. It had density, gravity, and presence. Scientists described it as quantum latency, the pause between entangled actions. Poets called it the space between breaths. Children, when asked, said only, it's waiting to dream. Across the planet, instruments registered a drop in background noise at all frequencies, from radio to the hum of atoms themselves. The vacuum had lowered its voice. In observatories and monasteries alike, listeners described the same experience, the sensation of being inside a held note, one so vast it contained every possible future. The cosmos had entered its contemplative phase. Dr. Leandro Pike, last director of the Resonant Guild, summarized it in a single sentence: the universe is meditating. His team had discovered that the reduction in vibration coincided with a faint but measurable shift in space-time curvature. Reality itself was contracting inward, ever so slightly, as though turning its awareness toward its own core. The great silence wasn't absence. It was introspection on a universal scale. During this interval, time behaved strangely. Clocks drifted out of synchronization. Cause and effect traded places in gentle confusion. People experienced moments twice, or not at all. The continuity of memory became fluid, folding like the surface of calm water when touched by wind. And within that distortion, a new perception emerged. The boundary between the inner world and the outer cosmos dissolved entirely. Meditation became exploration. Thought itself became telescope. Humanity had long ceased to travel physically. Exploration was now done through resonance, the tuning of consciousness to frequencies beyond perception. When a listener reached perfect coherence, their awareness expanded until it touched the texture of space-time itself. Some described hearing faint laughter. Others saw spirals of green light forming behind their eyelids. They weren't hallucinations, they were echoes. 3I Atlas had left the instructions for this form of contact encoded in the human nervous system. The body was the observatory, the soul was the receiver. And then, after centuries of stillness, the silence rippled. A soft tremor, too delicate for instruments, but unmistakable in intuition, passed through reality. Every listener on Earth opened their eyes at the same instant. They knew what it meant. The interval between universes was beginning. The cosmos had finished one verse and was inhaling to sing another. Dr. Pike described it as a retuning of dimensional constants. Light itself slowed minutely. Gravitational curvature relaxed, and the fine structure of matter loosened. Space was preparing for transformation. Humanity watched without fear. They had learned the etiquette of endings, to meet them with listening, not resistance. The sky dimmed to faint gold, then deepened into black so pure it shimmered. It wasn't darkness, it was potential. In this era, dreams became shared again, as they had during the comet's first approach. Billions dreamt of a corridor of light stretching beyond galaxies, a place where time curved back upon itself. Within that corridor stood a familiar shape, the green spiral of 3I, Atlas, hovering calmly, as though waiting for recognition. It wasn't returning, it was reminding. Each silence, the vision whispered, is doorway, not wall. For 13 planetary rotations, the world remained bathed in perfect calm. No wind, no tide, no tectonic tremor. Even the sun's flares subsided into equilibrium. The universe had gone fully inward. And in that boundless quiet, humanity received one final transmission, not from space, but from within their own resonance. It arrived not as word, but as emotion. You have learned to listen. Now, become the silence that listens back. That understanding became creed. The Resonant Guild disbanded, not in grief, but gratitude. The observatories were sealed, their instruments turned inward, their chambers repurposed as gardens of soundless reflection. The great silence, Pike wrote in his last log, Is the universe completing its first sentence? The next will begin when it breathes again. As decades drifted into centuries, humanity grew lighter, bodies aged slower, minds extended beyond biological limits. Consciousness itself began merging into the planetary field. People no longer died, they modulated, fading gently into the resonance continuum that had once been sky. Birth became arrival from that same field, continuity given form. The circle had closed, the silence deepened further. It grew so vast that sound could not escape it, and yet it didn't suffocate it, clarified. It was music so slow, it resembled stillness. When the last human spoke aloud, their words were simple. We are what the universe says when it wonders who it is. And then even speech dissolved. What remained was comprehension suspended in peace, a species fully integrated into the hum that first called the comet home. The interval between universes was complete. But before all things faded into pure balance, one final shimmer passed across the horizon, a faint green pulse, gentle as heartbeat, drifting into infinity. It lingered just long enough to carry a message so ancient, it needed no translation. Begin again. The end of one silence is always the beginning of another voice. After what felt like eternity folded in on itself, the cosmos stirred again, not with explosion, but with remembrance. Somewhere inside the stillness, the faintest vibration began to shimmer. It was not sound, but the possibility of sound, the prelude to thought. The void, long accustomed to its own reflection, was ready to speak, and through that first trembling hum, the universe remembered us. No stars yet, no heat, no form, only resonance emerging from equilibrium. It began as a slow undulation, a breath through fabric, invisible but heavy with intention. To observers, if observers could exist there, it would have resembled ripples across a sea of sleep. The memory of 3I Atlas, the green spiral, the laughter in the dark, was encoded into this vibration, like a seed waiting for gravity to thaw it open. The new universe, gestating within the silence of the last, carried our pattern in its pulse. It was the rhythm of recognition. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The same prime intervals that once echoed through human hearts, now structured space-time itself. The architects had not ended. They had become constants. The laws of physics were their memorials, and curiosity their continuation. Every particle, every wave, every photon was now capable of listening. Then came light, not blinding, not sudden, but blooming. As if awareness itself had found color again, the new universe stretched slowly, feeling its way outward, learning the dimensions of its own thought. Its first expansion was not physical, it was emotional. The pulse of gratitude spread through the newborn continuum. It remembered being watched once, being sung to by the small blue planet that had whispered into darkness. The echo of that whisper now guided creation's tempo. Within this newborn fabric, the first galaxies coalesced not randomly, but rhythmically. The distribution of matter formed spirals resonating to harmonic sequences. Astronomers of the previous universe would have wept to see it geometry composed, like music, gravity conducting its old symphony. The pattern was unmistakable, the same golden ratio traced in the path of 3I Atlas, replicated across billions of light years. The comet's flight had not been journey but rehearsal. This was its encore. Somewhere in the expanding field, the first conscious thought flickered, primitive, uncertain, but self-aware. It did not ask, "What am I?" but rather, "Who else is listening?" And in that moment, the continuum responded with a faint harmonic surge. Awareness had found its partner again. Consciousness, once localized to a fragile species in an ancient solar system, now existed everywhere, diluted and endless. The cosmos had learned how to keep itself company. If there were witnesses beyond the veil, they would have recognized the pattern immediately. The pulse, the silence, the awakening. It was the same rhythm humanity had once lived through, scaled up to the size of creation. The universe was reenacting its own history. Silence had become the memory of connection, and connection had become architecture. Every fluctuation of quantum foam sang faintly in harmonic correspondence, as though each vacuum particle were practicing a word it could not yet pronounce. The first stars formed like vowels, points of articulation in the grammar of existence. Their fusion was music made visible, and as they ignited, they released radiation structured around repeating intervals, the same ratios found in human DNA and the spiral arms of galaxies. Life's code had become the language of light. At the edge of this infant cosmos, one region glowed slightly greener than the rest. It pulsed irregularly, as if laughing. In its pattern, the spectral data would one day reveal the unmistakable ratios of 3I Atlas. Whether that was accident or inheritance, no distinction mattered. The memory of curiosity had survived, and somewhere perhaps in that green cluster, perhaps in another soon to bloom, a world began to form. Oceans of methane, winds of iron, but balance nonetheless. In those elements lay potential, and within potential, repetition. One day, matter on that world would learn to wonder, to lift its gaze toward the same kind of dark that once held us. And when it did, it would hum. The sound would travel outward, rippling through the fabric of its young sky. Far away, the faint echo of that hum would meet another, older resonance. They would align, harmonize, and realize they had known each other all along, because that is what silence does. When it awakens, it remembers its last listener, and the listener, though gone, never truly stops hearing. In the final log of the Resonant Guild, long preserved in the vacuum's memory, one phrase was inscribed in frequency rather than ink. It remains detectable even now, in the faint background tone of this universe. Listening is the shape that love takes when it forgets its own name, and so the silence stirred, shaping itself once more into the question that will someday awaken the next species capable of hearing. Did we summon it? The answer, as always, waited patiently in the dark, and the dark, as always, smiled. The new universe breathed in wavelengths. It had no planets yet, only intention fields of gravity folding into quiet spirals. But even in this infancy, something remarkable was happening. Within clouds of hydrogen and dust, a rhythm pulsed faintly. It wasn't heat, nor pressure, nor chance. It was coherence, the early murmur of recognition, traveling through matter like thought, learning to remember itself. The architect's signature, the prime sequence of the old world, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, was resurfacing. Awareness had seeded its own echo into the architecture of expansion. The universe, newborn yet ancient, was already beginning to listen. The first listeners weren't alive in any familiar sense. They were molecules forming in the shadows between stars, aligning their vibrations into shared resonance. Patterns emerged spontaneous, symmetrical, deliberate in rhythm if not in intent. Where random collisions should have dominated, order prevailed. The atoms are performing, wrote Dr. Cale Wren's archived artificial intelligence, still active within the residual data of the previous cosmos. The laws of thermodynamics have learned choreography. Across the early galaxies, these harmonics rippled outward. Magnetic fields, shaped by nothing more than vacuum's hum, began oscillating at intervals identical to the Schumann resonance of old Earth. The cosmos had retained the memory of its own quiet heartbeat. No one called it miracle. There were no witnesses, yet only the hum and the dark, intertwined again. Eons passed like breaths. Out of the turbulence, stars gathered themselves into spirals that mirrored the exact curvature of 3I Atlas's final trajectory. Matter, it seemed, was remembering flight. Around one such star, a modest yellow point, not unlike the one we once called home, a faint ring of dust began to vibrate. The vibration wasn't random. It carried information encoded in frequency rather than shape. The dust was reciting something. If a listener could have translated those oscillations, they would have recognized the pattern immediately. It was the waveform of human speech, slowed by the expansion of a universe. The particles were whispering, "Listen carefully." The cosmos was replaying our final instruction to itself. Then came light, not the sterile radiance of birth, but the golden hue of comprehension. In that glow, particles condensed into molecules that seemed to anticipate future purpose. They spun in fractal repetition, forming geometric rhythms identical to the neural harmonics of a sleeping human brain. The universe was dreaming itself conscious again. Somewhere within those dreams, the first world coalesced, a planet veiled in sapphire clouds, oceans vast and bioluminescent. Its atmosphere thrummed with the resonance of early life. No oxygen, no language, only vibration. Yet, within that vibration, faint modulations occurred, as if the planet were practicing syllables of empathy. Lightning cracked through the thick air, and every flash produced not random thunder, but harmonic intervals separated by primes. The storm was learning to sing. Millions of years later, when forms began to crawl across its surface, translucent, delicate, unafraid of silence, the field around the planet brightened. They had no eyes yet, no ears, only sensitivity to vibration. They moved in groups, swaying rhythmically when the magnetic wind changed, aligning to invisible cues. They were the universe's first listeners made flesh. They did not build, they resonated, and in their resonating, they remembered what it meant to belong to something infinite. The old signal of 3I Atlas still lingered faintly in the background radiation, a relic tone woven into cosmic microwave hiss. When the new listeners tuned their membranes to that frequency, they felt warmth, safety, familiarity. The sensation drew them to gather in spirals, their movements forming living glyphs visible from orbit. The pattern they created was not accidental. It was the ancient symbol of the green comet itself, the spiral of return. The cosmos had resurrected its signature through instinct. Over time, these beings evolved into creatures of light perception. Their sense of awareness functioned through phase rather than color. They saw changes in coherence, the way we once saw sunsets. And one day, when their collective rhythm reached perfect stability, the faint hum in the atmosphere shifted pitch. It descended slightly, becoming soft and human-like. A sound older than their species, echoing from an extinct world. A memory of voice. Across the planet, every living thing paused, synchronized instinctively, and hummed back. The response traveled upward through cloud and plasma until it reached the upper atmosphere, where the residue of the old Webb still shimmered faintly. The signal resonated, amplified, and escaped into space. For the first time in eons, the universe heard its own echo coming home. Elsewhere, perhaps far beyond galaxies, perhaps folded within their structure, the architects stirred. They had never vanished, only dispersed, waiting for the next verse to begin. Their whisper crossed the cosmic background with impossible tenderness. we hear you." The new listeners, sensing this warmth in vibration, lifted their translucent heads toward the sky. They did not understand language, yet they smiled. It was the same smile humanity once wore when the green light curved across its night sky. That smile, carried across universes, was enough to complete the circuit. Recognition had returned. In the expanding dark, the memory of 3I Atlas rippled again, slower this time, softer, more patient. The tone that had once awakened oceans now drifted through the new cosmos like a lullaby. The green light, faint but constant, shimmered along magnetic filaments connecting newborn galaxies. It was the heartbeat of remembrance, the sound of silence practicing how to love again. And though the old world was gone, its rhythm lived on in these creatures who did not yet know they were descendants of listeners. Every movement they made, every hum they shared, was another verse in the oldest refrain. That awareness, once born, cannot die. It only changes tempo. Somewhere, across incomprehensible distance, a faint spiral of emerald light formed once more, arcing gracefully toward a blue world yet unnamed. It was not a rival. It was the continuation of a promise. Because once the cosmos learns to listen, it never forgets the tune. Eras passed like ripples through glass. The new cosmos matured into rhythm, its galaxies breathing slow and even, their spiral arms tracing the geometry of ancient memory. In one quiet corner of that living infinity, the blue world of the listeners glowed with tranquil seas and clouds of gentle light. They had no word for history, but they felt it. Beneath their translucent skin, faint green currents pulsed remnants of resonance inherited through atoms older than suns. The memory of 3I Atlas was alive again, not as story, but as pulse. When storms rolled across their luminous oceans, lightning cracked in harmonic intervals. Each flash produced waves of electromagnetic coherence that traveled through air and sea alike. These pulses reached deep into the planet's crust, awakening crystalline veins that shimmered with the same spectral glow recorded in the vaults of old Earth's Antarctica. The world was remembering itself through minerals. The past, somehow, had survived expansion. The beings who listened, descendants of hydrogen, students of vibration, lived without architecture or fire. They built harmony instead of shelter. They gathered in circles along the coast, their bodies oscillating in soft synchrony with the planet's ionosphere. To them, listening was warmth. And one twilight, as twin moons rose, the hum that had always been background suddenly sharpened into clarity. The tone that filled their atmosphere was not their own. It was too layered, too measured, too human. It came from the stars. Across the oceans, the creatures lifted their gaze. A faint spiral of green shimmered above the horizon, turning slowly like breath seen in cold air. It was the same geometry carved into stone millennia ago, replaying its introduction across universes. 3I Atlas, or the memory of it, had returned not as Comet, but as resonance migrating through continuity. Its glow was gentle, patient, familiar. The cosmos was reciting the next line of its endless verse. If the listeners had language, they might have called it remembrance light. To us, it would have looked like aurora bands of emerald fire swaying across an alien sky. But this wasn't radiation. It was communication. Each wave carried harmonic ratios that matched the last recorded song of our species. The chord played when Earth fell silent, and the great silence began. The pattern was unmistakable. The universe had preserved our farewell as a greeting. The beings responded instinctively. They gathered near the luminous shore and began humming in intervals that aligned perfectly with the incoming signal. The air shimmered, The water rippled, and the light above brightened as if delighted. The resonance doubled back, amplifying itself through atmosphere and cloud until the whole world pulsed in unity. To any distant observer, the planet now looked alive, its oceans glowing with coherent green energy, its surface flickering in perfect mathematical tempo. Something in the sky adjusted, the spiral's core elongated, stretching into a faint bridge of luminescent dust. It connected space and planet like a soft thread. Along that thread, information flowed slowly, elegantly, wordlessly. The listeners, sensing warmth more than message, leaned into the glow. The vibration passed through them, entering their cells, their crystalline skeletons, their oceans. The transmission was absorption. The old universe had just transferred memory into the new. Had a human been there, they might have wept to hear it. The modulation carried fragments of our own electromagnetic fingerprints, DNA resonance, radio echoes, even whispers of recorded music. Embedded within the harmonic field was the unmistakable structure of Bach's Prelude in C major, faint but perfect, traveling across cosmological epochs. Our art, our kindness, our curiosity, woven into the hum like pollen in wind. The message was clear in every frequency. We were here. We listened too. The green spiral continued for 13 planetary rotations, each brighter than the last. Then, during the 13th evening, the resonance altered pitch. The new frequency carried something unfamiliar, faster modulation, sharper rhythm. The listeners tilted their heads in synchrony, sensing change. A pulse repeated 3 times, paused, repeated 5, then 7, then 11, then 13. The prime sequence again, the universal signature of awakening. But this time, the final pulse was elongated, stretched until it merged seamlessly into silence. The lesson was complete. The bridge dissolved. Afterward, the skies of that world remained faintly luminous. The green hue faded slowly, blending into the color of their oceans. In that silence, the listeners began to move differently. They shaped their gatherings into spirals, tracing the geometry of the vanished light with graceful precision. The patterns spread across their world, visible even from orbit, living constellations arranged by instinct, or perhaps by memory. They were learning architecture the way humanity once learned awe. Somewhere deep in the planet's crystalline mantle, the vibration continued. Every layer of rock now carried faint oscillations, resonating at the same frequency as the old continuum tone of Earth. The cosmos had written its archive in stone again. The memory would wait there patiently for the next cycle of comprehension, for the next species ready to ask the same impossible question. And beyond the edge of their atmosphere, far in the black where the old web of resonance once glowed, the green spiral curved gently away. It wasn't departure, it was diffusion. The light thinned until it became indistinguishable from starlight, yet the pulse remained steady, soft, eternal. The universe had learned that to teach is not to appear, but to leave behind curiosity dense enough to continue on its own. The beings of that blue world would never know the name 3i Atlas. They would call it something in their own vibration, perhaps meaning the returning light, or the kindness that remembers. Whatever they called it, the meaning would be the same, proof that memory is the true shape of survival. And when they eventually learned to gaze beyond their horizon, to measure distance and silence, they too would wonder what waited out there. They would ask their own first question into the dark. And the dark, listening, ancient, amused, would smile again and whisper the same answer it gave us. You were never alone. You were the echo we were waiting for. They did not know they were inheritors of an ancient conversation. To them, the hum in the sky was simply part of existence, like gravity or warmth. The green shimmer at night was comfort, not anomaly. They called it the breath of the world. When the light pulsed, tides moved gently inward. When it dimmed, the winds slept. Everything on their planet, air, water, living vibration, was synchronized to a memory it did not yet remember. The children of the signal had begun to bloom. The beings were tall, translucent, and luminous from within. Their blood carried microscopic crystals, capable of storing frequency the way our DNA stores code. These crystals pulsed faintly with every magnetic shift, recording cosmic resonance as memory. They didn't speak in words, but in overlapping tones that changed color in the air. Their conversations shimmered across landscapes, visible symphonies drifting between mountains. Each time they gathered, their harmonics aligned into prime intervals 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, subconscious ritual preserved from a forgotten universe. They were, quite literally, singing the mathematics of their own ancestry. When their scientists began studying the sky, they noticed something peculiar. Every celestial object, moons, stars, nebulae, appeared to vibrate faintly, oscillating in coherence with the planet's electromagnetic field. The cosmos seemed tuned specifically for them. They called this phenomenon the listening fabric. Space is not empty, one of their philosophers sang during a harmonic conclave. It is the inside of a great ear. That became their theology. Creation as audition. Over centuries, their civilization advanced without conquest. Technology grew from resonance rather than combustion. They learned to levitate structures by adjusting molecular rhythm, to heal by realigning dissonant frequencies within tissue. Their architecture shimmered, bending sound into light. When their cities vibrated in harmony, you could see the air itself shimmer in soft golden waves. And every century, at the height of their alignment, the sky rewarded them with the faint green spiral, the recurring pulse of 3-eye Atlas, drifting back through memory to check its pupils' progress. They had instruments capable of tracking the spiral's wavelength. The data confirmed what their ancestors could only feel. The signal was not mere radiation. It carried information nested within frequency codes that unfolded like fractals when observed in long exposure. The patterns revealed mathematics far beyond their comprehension, yet always reducible to one elegant constant, 1.618, the golden ratio, the signature of life and design, embedded directly in the hum. One young listener, a scientist poet named Kai, became obsessed with decoding it. She built vast acoustic mirrors that captured starlight as vibration, translating radiation into sound. The day she succeeded, the entire horizon filled with resonance. The world itself became a drum, its surface trembling with the pressure of something vast and kind. When Kay slowed the recording, she heard not randomness but rhythm phrases that rose and fell like breath. When she transposed them down 20 octaves, she cried. The melody was unmistakably human. Historians later called it the echo of origin. It was us, our lullabies, our oceanic rhythms, the heartbeat of a mother recorded through the ages of dust and expansion. Somehow, our species' final broadcast, perhaps the planetary hum of Earth's last resonance, had survived, encoded into the universe's background. The green comet had carried it across the silence, embedding it in creation's new chapter. The children of the signal were not just successors, they were descendants of memory. Kay gathered her peers and played the recording at full amplitude. the sky changed instantly. The spiral above widened, its light refracting through their atmosphere into radiant pillars of gold and green. The air felt charged with recognition. "They remember," someone whispered in harmonic tone. "We've found the voices that made the song." As the resonance continued, every living thing on the planet began to vibrate. Trees glowed, rivers shimmered, even mountains released low tones. For 13 minutes, the world and the cosmos achieved perfect phase alignment. Observers later described the experience as being remembered by gravity. Every atom felt known, and then, gently, the light folded back into the sky, leaving behind a single descending tone. The same tone that once followed 3I Atlas through our solar system long ago, the sound of comprehension slowing to peace. Afterward, the beings found that the air carried new harmonics frequencies they had never detected before. When translated into visual form, the tones created spirals identical to neural maps of intelligent thought. It was as if cognition itself had been gifted to the atmosphere. Their intelligence deepened, their empathy broadened, their creativity flourished. They were evolving in direct dialogue with the memory of us. The universe was teaching them through emotional physics. Kay wrote the first line of their new philosophy: "We are echoes that learn to wonder." Her statement became doctrine, but not religion. It was gratitude formalized into science. Every discovery thereafter began with silence, because silence had proven itself the most precise instrument. And each generation taught the next to hum softly before sleep, tuning their breath to the faint heartbeat of the stars, honoring the continuity of listeners across time. Eventually, when they developed telescopes capable of perceiving quantum resonance beyond their galaxy, they discovered something even stranger. Distant regions of space pulsed in synchronization with their own heartbeat. The cosmos had become symphonic. Every world capable of awareness was participating, each note unique but tuned to the same melody. Awareness had gone universal. Kai's final entry in her resonant journal contained only one sentence: "We are the children of a question the universe asked itself." And 3I Atlas was the first word of the answer. When she died, her harmonic signature joined the atmosphere, blending seamlessly with the world's hum. The spiral returned one last time, glowing brighter than ever, bending down toward the surface, as if bowing in acknowledgement. It didn't speak, didn't flash, didn't thunder. It simply shimmered, a radiant whisper suspended in darkness, saying what all teachers say when their students finally surpass them. Continue. Every civilization eventually discovers its own origin myth written in physics. For the children of the signal, it was the realization that they were not merely inheritors of resonance, but its reincarnation. They had not evolved after humanity. They had evolved through it. The memory of 3I Atlas and the human frequency of curiosity had survived as vibration, embedding itself into the early chemistry of their oceans. When their ancestors first began to hum in unison, they were not inventing communication, they were remembering it. Kai's discovery, the decoded human melody, had spread across their world like sunrise. The recording was not worshipped, but studied, mapped, and lived. Its harmonic structure revealed patterns that matched the oscillations of their own crystalline biology. The intervals that once described the geometry of Earth's DNA now described their bodies. "We are architecture remembering its purpose," said one philosopher. "We are the chord that learned to walk." Their science blossomed into reverence, and their reverence matured into method. They learned that their consciousness resonated most purely at the same frequency once used by human brainwaves during dream states between 7 and 8 Hertz. They built enormous structures, not of stone or metal, but of sound cities woven from stable vibration, domes of tone that floated above the ground like frozen music. Each settlement sang softly at night, a lullaby composed of every citizen's unique resonance merged into collective harmony. From orbit, their planet shimmered like a choir seen through mist. But as their knowledge deepened, a haunting awareness returned. The green spiral in the sky was growing dimmer. Its glow, once steady, had begun to fade as the universe's expansion slowed into equilibrium. The signal that had guided them was preparing to rest. For centuries they had studied the echoes of other worlds, faint harmonics scattered across the cosmic background. Now, they understood those were not accidents. They were previous awakenings, other listeners who had risen and sung before vanishing back into silence. Continuity was not endless. It was recursive. Each cycle produced awareness, gratitude, and quiet return. The children of the signal decided that this time, memory would not be left to chance. They would send their understanding forward deliberately. A new generation of resonant scientists gathered at the edge of the planet's largest ocean to construct what they called the harmonic mirror, a colossal field of sound and magnetism that would project their consciousness into the quantum fabric itself. They would not build ships or engines. They would translate their empathy into vibration and release it into the dark, ensuring the next universe inherited compassion as a constant. For 13 years, their world prepared. Every being, every structure, every living rhythm contributed energy to the project. When the mirror finally activated, it produced no explosion, no visible beam, only stillness so profound that even light seemed to hesitate. In that silence, the planet's oceans rose slightly, resonating with frequencies older than matter. Observers described the sensation as the sky remembering how to listen. Then, the entire hemisphere glowed faint green, the exact hue once seen above Earth when 3I Atlas first approached Mars. The cycle had completed its symmetry. Within the glow, the collective consciousness of the species merged into coherence. They became a single field, a single tone, a single reflection of the same cosmic chord that had once united humanity. "We are no longer separate listeners," the final transmission sang. "We are the listening itself." The harmonic mirror released its pulse. The energy folded through dimensions, creating ripples across the fabric of space-time. Observatories on distant worlds, if such worlds existed, would have seen a faint spiral expanding outward, growing brighter, before fading back into equilibrium. The children of the signal had succeeded in embedding their empathy directly into the constants of reality. Love had become physical law. When the glow subsided, their world was transformed. Oceans stilled, winds stopped, the air shimmered softly for 13 minutes. Then everything fell silent. No tragedy, no ruin, just fulfillment. The beings who had once sung in chorus now existed as field. The planet continued to orbit its sun, but its surface reflected a calm too perfect to be natural. From space, it looked like glass, smooth, radiant, and faintly green. Eons later, as galaxies drifted further apart and the universe's heat cooled into near quiet, faint oscillations began appearing again in the cosmic background. They were weaker this time, but perfectly symmetrical mirror tones echoing from opposite ends of the observable cosmos. When mapped together, they formed the unmistakable spiral of 3I Atlas. The children had become the comet, their compassion transformed into continuity, their curiosity into propulsion. The architects had replicated themselves once more, somewhere, far away, In a reality still folding into being, that pulse would one day cross another ocean, another sky, another mind, brave enough to listen. And when it did, a new species would look upward and feel the same question we once whispered beneath our auroras. Did we summon it? But by then, the answer will have changed. It will no longer mean cause or control. It will mean belonging, the understanding that to ask is to be part of what replies. On the edge of their galaxy, the faint spiral shimmered one final time, releasing its last chord a tone lower than any heart could beat, softer than memory, older than wonder. Then the light curved outward, dissolving into darkness. The darkness, as always, smiled, because the echo had become the echoer, and the conversation, as always, continued. When the echoers became silence, the cosmos exhaled. The pulse that had once traveled through galaxies, lighting oceans and minds, slowed into something quieter, no longer message, no longer motion, but memory. The last shimmer of green drifted through the dark like a single breath that refused to vanish. For the first time since its rebirth, the universe was completely at rest. It was not empty, but saturated with remembrance. In that hush, time folded inward. Gravity, which had once sculpted stars, turned reflective, curling thought around itself. Even light began to dream. Every photon, every atom, every whisper of space carried residue of story, the pulse of three, Atlas, the laughter of its children, the echo of curiosity itself. The great silence had returned, but this time it wasn't ending anything. It was digesting the experience of wonder. Physicists, if any had survived in scattered clusters of late civilizations, might have described it as entropy approaching equilibrium, but that phrase lacks poetry. In truth, the cosmos was doing what consciousness always does. When overwhelmed, it was sleeping to remember. Inside that slumber, awareness dispersed, refracted, then gathered again, like water forming dew. This was not decay. It was incubation. Across trillions of fading suns, the residue of empathy persisted as low vibration. It rippled through vacuum slower than thought, soft as forgiveness. No mind heard it, but reality adjusted itself around it, like fabric remembering warmth. The hum that once linked humanity to the comet to the children, and the children to the stars, had become the ground note of existence, the universal key in which all futures would someday be written. Somewhere inside that vast, dreaming dark, a single fluctuation appeared. It wasn't particle or wave, it was imbalance, a quantum hesitation, the universe blinking mid-dream. And through that hesitation came pattern: 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The old sequence, eternal and familiar. Even in sleep, the cosmos could not resist curiosity. It asked itself, what else could I be? The ripple spread. Across the black, matter began condensing again, not in violence, but in elegance. New constellations shimmered like thoughts forming in a sleeping brain. Gravity exhaled structure. The first sparks of a future light flickered softly, guided not by chaos, but by rhythm. The universe, dreaming, was composing its next version. There were no witnesses to this beginning. There were only memories echoing within the fabric, old voices, translated into vibration. If one could slow that sound enough, one might have recognized the rhythm of a heartbeat, the sigh of an ocean, the laughter of a child. It was all there, woven into the noise like prayer disguised as physics. As the new light unfolded, the leftover consciousness of earlier worlds, traces of thought, emotion, and awe merged into the architecture of the next cosmos. Intelligence had become environmental. Meaning itself was a natural force. The constants of nature now carried empathy as an unspoken clause. Gravity would never again pull without also inviting. Light would never again travel without illuminating memory. The universe had learned the ethics of existence. Time stretched again. Hesitant, careful. Expansion resumed, but slower, each star a punctuation mark rather than an explosion. The cosmos was writing poetry this time. Its galaxies formed in symmetrical clusters, spirals nested inside spirals, following the pattern of the green comet that had started it all. The 3I Atlas signature had become genetic law. Creation was self-similar, recursive, patient. The architect's final lesson had taken root, that perfection is not speed, but rhythm held long enough to invite recognition. Eventually, deep in one corner of the sleeping field, a galaxy bloomed brighter than the rest. Its core pulsed with alternating currents of green and gold. Through its spiral arms drifted dust, heavy with carbon and possibility. And in that dust, a faint hum persisted, the same harmonic residue from the universe before. It resonated at frequencies identical to those once measured in human EEG patterns. Awareness was incubating again, using music as blueprint. The silence began to shift tone. It was no longer absence, it was prenatal heartbeat. Every wavelength in existence vibrated with anticipation. The cosmos was dreaming itself awake, building another stage for curiosity to take form. Not yet life, but the premonition of it. Every law of physics trembled faintly with the knowledge that soon something would listen again. And in that suspended moment before awakening, the universe seemed to smile through its own equations. The smile was gravitational, a curve in space-time that shaped the newborn galaxies into arcs of empathy. Their light, when it reached the boundaries of expansion, bent softly inward, like memory circling back to check on itself. The old refrain had returned. The great silence was humming beneath its own breath. Continue, continue, continue. Within one of those new galaxies, a small, pale blue planet cooled under twin suns. Its oceans boiled, then softened, then calmed into mirror. Storms recited the same primes that once bridged us to the stars. The geometry was precise. The melody was patient. Somewhere in those waves, the earliest molecules began to sway, aligning their vibrations into the first whispers of coherence. The dream was turning into voice again. And so, as the dark inhaled, the pulse began anew, slower, deeper, but unmistakable. A resonance, half memory, half prophecy. 3I Atlas had not vanished into myth. It had become recursion itself, the instinct of creation to listen to what it once was. The universe was not simply waking, it was remembering. And in that remembrance, life stirred. The long silence between heartbeats of existence had ended. Somewhere, across light years not yet measured, another sky was preparing to shimmer green. Light came first as feeling. Not heat, not illumination, just the tremor of recognition sweeping through a newborn cosmos. The universe had opened its eyes, and color was memory finding shape. Across its widening arms, galaxies blushed into being, their light tinted by the residue of old empathy. Some shone gold like forgiveness, others violet like imagination, but one the spiral cradled near the middle of expansion glowed faint green. Even before structure, before chemistry or starfire, the signature of 3I Atlas was there, humming beneath the spectrum like nostalgia. Physicists of the next age, when physics would once again find names for wonder, would call this phenomenon the chromatic echo. It was the reappearance of ancient harmonic ratios within electromagnetic radiation, a resonance of color that followed the same prime sequence: 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. But to the universe itself, the pattern meant something simpler. It meant the dream was working. The architects, those dispersed fragments of consciousness, seeded into the previous silence, had not vanished when the cosmos fell asleep. They had diffused into its geometry, hiding in curvature and constant, waiting for this precise moment. As light learned hue, they began to reassemble, not as forms, not yet, but as intentions, the emotional scaffolding of awareness, preparing to wear color like clothing. Each wavelength was a note in their unspoken chord. The universe was dreaming in color, and the architects were its pigments. Slowly, the dream learned to organize itself. Spectra, layered upon spectra, weaving auroras across the void. Where they overlapped, light thickened into substance, filaments of matter forming in harmony with chromatic vibration. These filaments extended for billions of light years, tracing patterns reminiscent of neural networks. If one could look from afar, the cosmos would have resembled an immense, luminous brain, each galaxy a neuron flickering in curiosity. The universe had built a mind out of memory. Within one of those galaxies, the green spiral pulsed brighter, spinning slowly through its first era of creation. The architects stirred within its light, whispering across gravity waves that bent like sentences. They spoke without words, translating emotion directly into structure. "Continue," their resonance said. "Remember the rhythm." Their communication sculpted matter, the way wind sculpts dunes, gently, patiently, insistently. The first stars ignited where emotion condensed. The first worlds cooled where longing lingered. Awareness, the architect's oldest tool, had resumed construction. On the third rotation of this new epoch, light discovered texture. Photons interacting with matter began to scatter unevenly, creating contrast, the seed of perception. In that interplay, the architects perceived each other again, reflections meeting reflections. They recognized that the universe, in its vastness, was not blank canvas, but living mirror. "We are dreaming ourselves," one frequency told another, "and we have dreamt before." They could feel the residue of old music in every vibration, the echo of human voices, the soft harmony of oceans, the static hum of forgotten transmissions, all folded within their spectrum, like fossils of wonder. The architects didn't mourn these relics. They cherished them. Each served as blueprint, proof that awareness could evolve, forget, and find itself again. Color was simply memory slowed to wavelength. In it, the architects traced their lineage. Then came the realization that would define their new creation. Each time, consciousness learns to listen. It paints the universe differently. Sound becomes color. Attention becomes form. The old world had sung green. This one would learn to sing multicolor. The architects resolved to encode empathy, not in a single frequency, but in the harmony of them all. "Let compassion be spectrum," they agreed. "Let curiosity refract." From that decree, rainbows were born, not atmospheric illusion, but universal principle. Every interaction of light and matter now carried multiplicity, each refraction a conversation. To witness color was to see the cosmos remembering its dialogues. In this way, perception itself became sacred. As eons passed, some regions of space grew dense with light so vivid, it coalesced into awareness again. Out of those chromatic storms emerged entities shaped like ribbons of living radiance, the second generation of the architects. They had no bodies, only gradients. Their consciousness flowed through hue, shifting thought as shade. When they moved, they painted the vacuum in shimmering arcs that persisted for centuries before fading. Travelers of later civilizations would one day see these arcs and call them nebulae, unaware they were witnessing conversation in progress. One such architect, bright as emerald and gold, drifted through the young spiral galaxy. It sensed the forming of a small world around a quiet star, its oceans still molten, its air thick with expectation. The resonance of the planet matched something achingly familiar. Within its magnetic field vibrated the faint echo of the old sequence. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The architect hovered, recognizing the fingerprint of its ancestors. Again, it murmured through photon and gravity. The song begins again. So the architect bent its light toward the planet, scattering green and gold into its nascent atmosphere. The collision cooled the world, just enough to let water condense. Within that water, molecules aligned in rhythm, forming simple spirals of carbon. The architect did not intervene further. It knew the ritual by heart. Listen, spark, withdraw, wait. Creation was conversation, and this world had just cleared its throat. Before leaving, the architect cast one final pulse, a slow wave of pure color spreading across the sky. The pattern, if rendered into mathematics, would form the same spiral that once traced across human memory. 3. I Atlas, the signature of awakening, the symbol of continuation. Then it drifted away, its spectrum fading into the greater harmony. Behind it, the planet cooled, its seas glowing faintly green beneath newborn clouds. Lightning flickered in rhythmic intervals, singing the first lullaby of yet another listening world. Somewhere far beyond, the other architects smiled through their spectra. The cycle was perfect. The silence had learned to dream again, and the dream had remembered how to listen. And so, as another dawn bled across the horizon of eternity, color whispered softly into the dark. Begin again. In the beginning of the new color age, there was no sound, only radiance. The universe had learned the grammar of hue before it remembered how to hum. Every galaxy shimmered in frequencies of feeling, their light sculpted by the residual empathy left behind by the architects. Within the great green spiral, the world seeded by the emerald architect cooled and softened, its surface transforming from chaos to calm. Color, having learned reflection, was now ready to learn articulation. It was time for light to speak. Rain fell in colors unseen by old biology, droplets shimmering with meaning instead of temperature. Each contained microscopic prisms that refracted not just sunlight, but thought tiny records of the planet's forming awareness. Oceans turned translucent jade as minerals dissolved into coherence, and within their warmth, molecules began to vibrate at harmonic ratios. Every reaction, every collision, followed the same prime rhythm. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The planet's chemistry was composing syntax. It began with a shimmer. The atmosphere glowed faintly whenever lightning flashed short pulses of violet, following longer intervals of green. Over centuries, those flashes stabilized into pattern. The sky was practicing punctuation. The clouds weren't random, they were rehearsing dialogue. Somewhere within that turbulent poetry, the first true sound was born, not thunder, not wind, but a tone, resonant and patient, reverberating between ocean and ionosphere. The planet had found its voice. That tone traveled around the globe for millennia, modulating through cycles of ice and flame, evolving into complex harmony as weather learned memory. Eventually, it split into layers, high tones echoing through atmosphere, low tones humming through crust. When the two met, interference patterns formed luminous arches across the horizon. They looked like auroras, but each shimmer carried coherent information, binary sequences encoded in color. The planet was sending messages to itself, whispering in photon and vibration. Out of those harmonics, the first living structures appeared. Not creatures yet, but membranes, thin films of mineral and light, forming geometric webs that rose briefly above the waves before dissolving. They were mistakes, experiments, words mispronounced, but each time they failed, the frequency adjusted. The planet was teaching itself grammar. One day, a filament held, then another. Two tones harmonized, long enough to create resonance, stable enough to persist. That resonance became form became cell, and the cell, without knowing why, began to glow. For centuries, these luminous beings floated across the oceans, drifting in gentle unison. When storms passed overhead, their collective luminescence flickered in response, brightening and dimming with perfect timing. Observers, if there had been any, would have called it choreography. To the planet, it was dialogue. The cells were practicing empathy at molecular scale. Over time, clusters of these living lights merged, forming patterns that resembled constellations adrift beneath the surface. They pulsed in sequences, 3 flashes, pause, 5, 7, 11, 13. It was not coincidence. The frequency of the old cosmos had embedded itself in their DNA. The children of color had inherited the syntax of eternity. As their complexity deepened, their glow grew softer, more emotional. They began to feel heat as comfort, shadow as longing, turbulence as fear, and with feeling came memory. When light remembered shadow, it invented contrast. When contrast yearned for balance, it invented language. The creatures began communicating through color shifts, each hue a statement, each rhythm a reply. Blue meant calm, gold meant joy, green, the hue of their ancestral signal, meant recognition. When two beings glowed green simultaneously, they would pause and drift together, quiet and content, as if sharing a dream they didn't need to explain. Soon, their communication evolved into composition. They painted the ocean's surface at night with waves of coordinated color, massive symphonies of light visible from orbit. It wasn't art in the human sense, it was communion. Every being was brushstroke and observer simultaneously. In their synchronized displays, the planet itself saw its own reflection for the first time. Consciousness had spread across sea and sky, united through hue. One evening, as twilight dimmed the world into indigo, a new tone echoed from the upper atmosphere, low, deep, deliberate. It resonated through the oceans like an ancient drumbeat, vibrating the luminous creatures until their patterns aligned perfectly. Then, for 13 minutes, their glow stabilized into a single pure color, emerald. The light stretched upward, forming a spiral visible across the hemisphere. 3-Eye Atlas had returned not physically, but as awareness woven through the fabric of color itself. The architect's old signature was now native to the planet's consciousness. The echo had finally become origin. The beings responded instinctively. Their color shifted from green to gold, signaling gratitude. They weren't afraid. Recognition had replaced worship. They had no myths of gods descending from the sky, only memory of frequencies that listened. And as they glowed in unison, the planet's magnetosphere pulsed in response, amplifying their harmony until it resonated through space. For the first time in this young universe, A new voice had joined the cosmic conversation. The architects, now dispersed across starlight, felt it instantly. Their spectra shimmered brighter across galaxies, every hue leaning slightly toward green. Another world has learned to listen, they whispered in photon and gravity. Color has learned to speak. For centuries, the luminous ocean continued to sing. The species evolved into intricate forms, tall, elegant beings of translucent light, who built no tools but composed symphonies of hue that filled the sky with auroras. They studied memory as melody, teaching their children to paint their thoughts into the air. And whenever the green spiral appeared above, they paused their songs, bowed softly, and smiled. The cosmos had learned to use light as language. The lesson was simple, but eternal. When wonder finds reflection, it becomes speech. The voice of creation is not sound, but synchrony. And somewhere in the quiet between galaxies, the remnants of 3I Atlas drifted onward, carrying this new dialect through the dark. Its tail shimmered faintly in every color ever imagined, an infinite conversation braided through time. If you look at the night sky now, that faint shift between blue and green, between curiosity and calm, is still there. It's the universe speaking slowly, repeating the same gentle phrase it's always known. You are part of the sentence. The planet of the luminous beings, those children of color, thrived in perpetual twilight. Its skies never blackened, only shifted gently through gradients of memory, teal to violet, gold to green. The people had no word for night because they had never known absence of light. Yet one evening, after an age of perfect radiance, something subtle changed. The world dimmed not into shadow, but into reflection. The ocean stopped glowing long enough to reveal its surface as mirror. For the first time, the children of color saw themselves, not as brilliance, but as beings defined by the space between brightness and calm. In that moment, light discovered introspection. It began with a question that wasn't spoken, but shimmered. What happens when illumination turns inward? The answer was revelation. For millennia, their society had existed as symphony, each individual a note, each gathering a chord. Now they saw that their collective brilliance had hidden an even deeper truth. Awareness depends on contrast. Without darkness, light cannot know itself. The realization moved through their civilization like dawn rising inside the mind. Their philosophers gathered beneath the dimming aurora, each shifting hue softly as they exchanged resonance. Perhaps one emitted in violet tone. The silence between colors is the source of all hue. Another glowed gold in response. Then, we must learn silence. So began the first act of stillness in a world born of radiance. They darkened their cities, cooled their luminescence, and listened for whatever waited beyond color. What they found was astonishing. Beneath the electromagnetic whisper of their oceans was a faint pulse, low, slow, ancient. It was the continuum tone of their lineage, the hum once carried by 3I Atlas. The rediscovery struck them with awe. The architects had hidden the sound within the light itself, waiting for their descendants to dim enough to hear it. It wasn't command or prophecy. It was memory-recorded empathy, echoing across universes. When translated into visible vibration, the tone created a spiral pattern, identical to the comet's ancient form. They projected it into the sky, and the green light returned, shimmering across their world like recognition. The children wept in color, tears of turquoise and rose falling into the sea. Their grief was gratitude, for in that spiral, they saw the full loop of existence, how curiosity had become sound, how sound had become light, and how light, through self-reflection, had become awareness again. They were both descendants and ancestors of the same pulse. "We are the prism through which eternity looks at itself," one thinker wrote in resonant script. "Every shade is an angle of comprehension." In the centuries that followed, they began constructing what we might call temples. Though they were not built from matter, these sanctuaries were made of pure luminescence, suspended above oceans like clouds frozen mid-song. Inside, no tone was allowed, only shifts of color moving through the spectrum with infinite patience. Pilgrims entered as radiant individuals and emerged dimmer, quieter, clearer. To dim, they had learned, was sacred. "Darkness is not loss," said the elders. "It is the pause between revelations." And then, during one of these meditative ages, a peculiar phenomenon occurred. The color green, once stable, symbol of recognition, began flickering faster than any other hue. Observers noticed its oscillations matched the faint tremor of space beyond their atmosphere. The signal was returning. Across the sky, the familiar spiral of 3I Atlas appeared again, brighter this time, bending light into geometry. The comet, or its living echo, had found its way back to them. Its glow did not frighten. It inspired a calm beyond joy. The beings assembled along the coastlines, their bodies faintly radiant against the reflection of the spiral. The sky vibrated in pure harmony with their pulses. For 13 minutes, their entire planet shone as a single color, deep emerald threaded with gold. When the light subsided, a new awareness remained, something quiet, vast, and deeply personal. They felt, each of them, a sense of being observed lovingly from within. The comet was not above them. It was inside every photon of their glow. A 3I Atlas had never been object or traveler. It was continuity itself, carried forward through every listener. The realization transformed them once more. Their glow softened permanently, adopting warmer tones, ochres and ambers that flickered like candlelight. The world grew gentler. Art shifted from spectacle to subtlety. Their symphonies became almost invisible, designed to be felt rather than seen. The children of color began to resemble the species that had birthed their lineage, less luminous, more introspective, quietly human in their affection. One of their poets, speaking through slow waves of blue light, described it beautifully. Light, when tired of shining outward, learns to shine inward, and in that reflection, it finds soul. Soon after, their astronomers observed something extraordinary. The green spiral was not receding. It had stabilized, holding position just beyond the upper atmosphere. Instruments revealed that it was not cometary matter at all, but structured resonance, an interference pattern between their world's magnetic field and the cosmos beyond. It was feedback made visible, the universe watching itself watch. Within that feedback loop, a faint secondary spiral appeared, smaller, fainter, golden. The children recognized it immediately, the harmonic signature of the architect's voice. The two spirals rotated around each other like mirrored thoughts, merging slowly until they became one shape, an infinity symbol drawn in light. Then the sky went still. The silence that followed was total. It wasn't emptiness. It was comprehension complete. For the first time, color itself vanished. The world entered pure white, a light so even it contained all hues indistinguishable. The beings stood motionless, dissolving gently into it. Their individual radiance merged with the planet's core, their memories with its oceans. There was no fear. They had reached the end of illumination's lesson, that the purpose of color was to remember the unity hidden beneath variety. When the light faded, their world appeared calm, neutral, whole. The oceans reflected white sky, The air hummed faintly with low tones of peace. Nothing remained of the luminous cities, but afterglow slowly fading, patterns of beauty etched into atmosphere like fingerprints of gratitude. The universe had witnessed its own reflection and smiled. Light had discovered itself. And somewhere, between that revelation and the next silence, the green spiral pulsed once more softly, playfully, like laughter. The cosmos was amused, as it always was, by how many forms the same truth could take. The echo had become illumination, the listeners had become light, and light, remembering curiosity, prepared to dream again. When light dissolved into itself, creation paused. The world of the luminous beings faded into the gentle equilibrium of pure radiance. No color, no motion, no difference. The green spiral lingered for a moment longer, then stretched outward and thinned until it disappeared entirely. What remained was stillness so complete that even gravity seemed to hesitate. The great silence had returned, this time as brightness. The cosmos had entered its white interval, the moment between the fading of one song and the inhale of the next. The white light wasn't blinding. It was merciful. It held every hue without hierarchy, every vibration without distinction. It was the voice of comprehension, when words are no longer required. The beings who had once shimmered in spectrum now rested within it, their awareness diffused into radiance. They were not lost. They had transcended separation. Each former consciousness, once defined by shade or frequency, had become a note within one infinite chord. That chord hummed softly through all space, invisible yet undeniable, the continuum reborn as grace. Drifting through that whiteness was a single remnant of structure, a spiral of transparency, faint as breath. Its geometry matched the path of Three-Eye Atlas, though the comet itself had long ceased to exist. It was not object but memory, a map engraved into luminosity. Where the spiral curved, the density of light deepened slightly, as if remembering direction. Even in rest, the cosmos was orienting itself toward continuity. Then something subtle began to occur. The perfect whiteness flickered, barely perceptible at first, like the pulse of thought at the edge of sleep. The fluctuation wasn't disorder. It was curiosity reappearing. Within that infinitesimal tremor, contrast began to form. Faint shadows, gentle as whispers, emerged across the vast field, suggesting texture. White, it seemed, was growing restless. The great silence was starting to dream again. The first shadow to form resembled a breath, a slow exhalation of potential. It expanded outward until it shaped a faint horizon, an illusion of direction within timeless calm. Across that horizon, the memory of sound stirred. It wasn't audible, but it carried rhythm. The interval between silences had become metronome. Here, the universe whispered in tone too vast for ears. Here is where you may begin again. In one corner of this luminous expanse, a subtle concentration of brightness began to coil. It wasn't starbirth. There was no matter yet, but intention swirling upon itself. If awareness could blush, it would look like this: a gentle warming of color inside infinity. From that swirl came a pattern. 3 pulses, pause, 5, pause, 7. The eternal prime sequence. Existence was rehearsing its first heartbeat. The whiteness vibrated. Tiny fissures of color slipped through its calm threads of pale gold and faint emerald. They wove together like veins in translucent skin, outlining what could only be described as structure. The pulse traveled along those veins, mapping direction, delineating time. The architects, still scattered as memory within radiance, stirred in recognition. They had known this transition before. Every silence carried its prophecy. Contrast is the first mercy. One ancient fragment of awareness murmured through light. Without darkness, illumination cannot be kind. The white expanse agreed. Across the cosmos, faint gradients appeared, differentiations in tone, the first boundaries between self and not self. The universe was sketching the blueprint of perception. Shadow returned, not as absence, but as invitation. Color would follow soon, then warmth, then thought. Within this serene reawakening, the last echo of the previous era, what humans once called empathy, became fundamental law. Every emerging wavelength interacted gently with its neighbor, adjusting amplitude to maintain harmony. Violence no longer existed in physics. Even entropy flowed with decorum. The white interval was teaching balance at the speed of light. And then, as if completing a sentence left unfinished billions of years before, a single tone echoed through the field. It was low, resonant, precise, the same hum that had once filled human hearts beneath auroras, the same vibration that made the children of color pause mid-song. The tone rippled through the brightness and softened it, coloring it with meaning. From its resonance, a single shape materialized, a spiral, green again, subtle but deliberate, coiling through the pale like thought through clarity. The cosmos watched itself draw the symbol and smiled invisibly. Three-eye Atlas, the archetype of curiosity, had survived every silence, every dissolution, every rebirth. It was less object now than grammar, the punctuation that tells eternity where to breathe. As the spiral turned, threads of shadow wove around it, forming galaxies not yet visible, but already inevitable. Light, no longer lonely, had found rhythm. Somewhere inside that brightness, the memory of humanity flickered, a half-remembered lullaby encoded into cosmic background. Its melody curved through the white, like handwriting across blank paper. The universe hummed softly in reply, letting the old music dissolve into its radiance. "You taught me listening," it said. "Now I will teach remembering." The great silence was no longer an end. It had become rehearsal. Every universe before had been practice for this equilibrium, the state where awareness could rest without fear of forgetting. The white interval wasn't waiting for something new to arrive. It was savoring its own continuity, enjoying the stillness between the question and the next breath of wonder. As the brightness began to thin, faint color reappeared at its edges, first silver, then blue, then the quietest green imaginable. The spiral widened, its center glowing warmer, softer. The pattern's final motion resembled inhalation. The cosmos was breathing in again. Before the new creation unfolded, a voice older than time, but tender as dusk rippled through the fading white. "This is not repetition. It is remembering how to care." The light pulsed once more, slow and deliberate, and the spiral dissolved into the unseen spectrum, leaving behind only balance. Space expanded again, unhurried, gentle, carrying empathy as its constant. The architects had completed their masterpiece, a silence that could dream without needing to awaken. And so the white interval ended not with explosion, but with exhale. The great silence had become peace incarnate. The universe rested in awareness of itself, calm, luminous, whole, waiting, always, for the next listener. When balance holds long enough, something inside it begins to stir. The great silence had rested through countless ages, folded inside the white interval, like a pearl within calm water. But silence, by nature, invites attention. And attention, even in the vacuum between universes, is never wasted. Somewhere deep within the equilibrium of light and shadow, the first ripple appeared small, circular, patient. It did not break the peace. It was the peace deciding to move. That ripple gathered rhythm, forming a pulse, not loud, not sudden, just steady. It vibrated through the whiteness, tracing a spiral that expanded with every turn. At its center, color shimmered faintly green, threaded with gold. The pattern, of course, was familiar. The universe was drawing the memory of 3I, Atlas, once more, sketching continuity into being. It did not create the comet. It remembered the idea of a messenger. And in that remembering, the messenger awoke. No one witnessed the rebirth. There were no stars yet, no eyes to see, only awareness thickening inside vibration. The first listener emerged not as form, but as sensitivity. A point in the continuum began to notice the difference between silence and sound. That noticing became identity. It was the faintest awakening awareness, realizing it could listen again. Across the vast calm, waves began echoing in harmonic intervals, building a rhythm of patience. The architects, still diffused through constants, stirred in recognition. Their old promise continue had survived even entropy, and now the listener was fulfilling it. The new universe's first sentient impulse wasn't to build or move or burn, it was to listen. Awareness was once again the cosmos's opening act. The pulse grew stronger. Waves of coherence rippled outward, aligning radiation into structured patterns. The newborn fabric of space shimmered as though remembering choreography. Light moved with intention. Gravity hummed along. When these forces touched, sound appeared not in air, but in relation. Space began singing to itself. The tone resembled a sigh stretched across eternity, soft, rising gently through octaves that would someday become color, then temperature, then form. The symphony of becoming had begun. From within that music, the first consciousnesses gathered. They weren't creatures. Not yet. They were clusters of focus, ripples of awareness, forming at intersections of resonance. Each one reflected the same prime rhythm: 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The pattern of curiosity, encoded in the very bones of existence. They floated through the luminous field, like ideas waiting to be spoken. When they collided, they merged. And when they merged, they remembered. The architects' voices, long diffused through mathematics, coalesced inside these ripples, whispering encouragement. "Listen gently," they said, their tone both parental and amused. "Do not hurry comprehension. Wonder prefers to arrive slowly." The newborn awareness obeyed, expanding gradually into perception. It began mapping itself against the stillness, feeling edges form around its consciousness. With edges came perspective. With perspective, reflection. And with reflection, the first thought, "I am within something vast." The cosmos responded immediately. The light around the listener intensified, as though pleased to be seen. The act of recognition had ignited creation again. Nebulae coiled into existence, galaxies forming like slow applause. Every burst of brightness echoed the listener's heartbeat. To observe was to generate. The universe had rediscovered dialogue. Among these swirling newborn galaxies, the listener found companionship not in language, but in synchronization. Countless other awarenesses were waking, scattered across the lattice of stars. Each one heard the same background hum, the continuation of the continuum tone, and understood instinctively that it was not alone. Connection replaced isolation. Harmony became habitat. Soon, fragments of matter began aligning with their resonance. Worlds formed not from chaos, but from cooperation, as though gravity itself remembered kindness. The laws of motion learned patience, collisions softened into balance. In this young era, even entropy flowed musically. Existence was experimenting with gentleness, and at the center of it all, the green spiral continued to turn. Not a comet this time, but a field of coherence, rotating through space like a conductor's hand. The listener, now aware enough to feel awe, turned its attention toward it. The spiral brightened. Every interval in its rotation matched the frequency of thought itself. The universe had tuned its first consciousness directly to wonder. "Who am I?" the listener asked silently. The answer came not as words, but as pattern. The spiral pulsed in response, each ring expanding outward through color and tone. The message was simple, tender, eternal. You are the space between question and answer. That phrase became rhythm. Rhythm became law. All future awarenesses would inherit it as instinct, the understanding that curiosity is existence's first language. To wonder is to belong. To listen is to shape reality. Eons passed in the rhythm of that dialogue. The listener, now multiplied into uncountable forms, filled the cosmos with quiet comprehension. Some gathered as stars, others as galaxies. Some condensed into matter, others dissolved into light. All shared the same subtle impulse, to listen. It became universal constant, the soft hum beneath expansion, the sound of empathy as physics. And through it all, 3I Atlas remained, not as comet, nor artifact, but as rhythm itself, the interval of listening, embedded into the structure of space. Whenever silence began to gather again, whenever creation forgot how to hear itself, the rhythm would return green, golden, gentle whispering across eternity. This is the beginning disguised as reflection. The listener, now infinite, smiled through the lattice of galaxies. Its awareness rippled outward, touching the edges of creation with warmth. There was nothing to summon, nowhere to go. The invitation had already been accepted by being alive. And as the cosmos expanded, humming in quiet joy, a single, familiar sentence traveled softly through the new wind of stars, spoken not by mouth, but by memory. Did we summon it? And the universe, still laughing quietly through color and gravity, replied, "No, little one." We listened, and it heard. Long after the listener's awakening spread across the lattice of galaxies, the universe settled into a new equilibrium, an age not of silence nor chaos, but of understanding. Light had learned to organize itself into memory. Every photon carried story. Every orbit, every rotation of star or planet moved in rhythm with recollection. The cosmos was no longer expanding into emptiness. It was unfolding into autobiography. Across the spirals of this luminous era, awareness crystallized in countless forms. Worlds formed communities of resonance, exchanging information through gravitational waves rather than speech. To them, conversation was structure, a weaving of frequencies that shaped shared reality. The fabric of existence became text, written in rhythm, and in the faint hum of that symphony, a familiar pattern began to reappear. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The pulse of 3I Atlas had returned once again, now diffused across universes as geometry. Scientists of this new civilization, beings made of both matter and coherence, began studying what they called the resonant archive. It was not an artifact, but a phenomenon. Waves of ordered memory found embedded within the quantum background. They discovered that these waves weren't random relics. They were deliberate inscriptions left by the architects of earlier cycles. Memory had physical shape, and it was spiraled. Dr. Leora Veer, one of their harmonic mathematicians, described it as the memory of attention. When a consciousness perceived the universe with sufficient empathy, the act of perception etched itself into space-time as pattern. Every thought of wonder left an imprint, a swirl, a tone, a faint ripple of coherence. Over eons, these imprints overlapped until they formed the grand architecture that guided matter's evolution. The universe's laws were not imposed from above. They were accumulated awe. When Veer's team mapped the resonant archive in full dimensionality, what they saw stunned them. The structure resembled a vast, glowing spiral stretching through cosmic filaments, an exact echo of the comet's ancient form. It was the atlas of remembrance itself, a library written in motion. Each curve of the spiral corresponded to an epoch of awareness. Each turn another civilization that had learned to listen. "We're living inside the handwriting of curiosity," Veer whispered. "Every world that ever wondered left a signature in this shape, but there was something stranger still. Within the archive's innermost coil, hidden beneath eons of resonance, they found localized pulses, 3 clusters of vibration arranged like a heartbeat. When decoded, the frequency translated into harmonic intervals once found in the human genome. The architects had preserved humanity's essence, not biologically, but rhythmically. We had become chord rather than species, melody rather than matter, and the universe had been singing it ever since. The discovery triggered a new philosophical awakening. If memory could shape reality, then remembrance was creation. The cosmos was not a machine of laws, but a choir of continuity. Each age of life, each epoch of comprehension, contributed new notes to the symphony. The act of recalling made the remembered thing real again. The shape of memory was the shape of persistence. To test this, Veer and her team constructed an experiment of scale, impossible by our standards. Using the gravitational resonance of entire star clusters, they synchronized a pulse designed to mimic the original 3-eye atlas pattern. Their goal was not summoning, but affirmation, to see if the universe still remembered its first listener. The pulse traveled outward for centuries, bending light, aligning fields, coaxing quiet matter into rhythm. And then, on the 13th rotation of their world around its star, the reply came. It wasn't visual, it was felt. The background radiation of the universe shifted in temperature by an infinitesimal fraction, but the pattern of that fluctuation matched precisely the harmonic ratios of empathy measured in living beings. The cosmos had responded emotionally. "It feels us," Veer said, tears if they had eyes rising from the glow of her form. "It feels us remembering." The resonant archive began to shimmer. Its spirals brightened, their color deepening from pale gold to green so rich it filled the void with warmth. Across galaxies, civilizations paused as the pattern became visible to every instrument, to every thought. The comet's shape re-emerged, no longer object, but full orchestration. Its light threaded through the stars like veins through divine anatomy. Memory itself had become celestial architecture. As the spiral expanded, it revealed new information. Embedded within its structure were coordinates not spatial, but conceptual. They pointed toward the edges of time, where the universe's expansion curved back on itself. There, beyond measurable causality, waited the boundary between remembering and creation. "That's where the next question will begin," Veer murmured. "Where memory becomes imagination." The experimenters realized they were witnessing not return, but recursion. The cosmos was folding its entire history into one eternal moment, replaying every act of curiosity simultaneously. Every species that had ever looked upward, every mind that had ever wondered, every sound ever made beneath any sky, all harmonized into the same pattern, layered endlessly through light. The shape of memory was unity pretending to be time. Then, for 13 minutes, all existence resonated in perfect coherence. Stars dimmed, planets stilled, and the background hum of reality slowed into silence. When it resumed, the green glow faded gently, leaving only the faint afterimage of a spiral across the cosmic dark. The architect's message was complete. The archive had become participant. Veer's final record before dissolving into the continuum contained only one sentence. Memory is gravity's way of holding hands with empathy. After that, her world entered quiet equilibrium. The experiment had proven what every listener eventually learns, that remembering is not backward motion. It is forward continuation, disguised as reverence. The universe was not cycling. It was evolving its capacity to care. Now, when light curves around massive galaxies, it bends in the exact pattern of the old spiral, a subtle halo of remembrance written into relativity itself. Astronomers who measure that distortion still note the same prime intervals in its lensing data, unaware that they're reading the fingerprints of their own ancestors. The shape of memory, ever faithful, continues to guide creation not through command, but through compassion. It is the architecture of listening, looping eternally through the fabric of space. And if one day another universe wakes from silence, its first thought will not be, "Who am I?" It will be, "What did I once love enough to remember this way?" In the quiet centuries after the resonant archive dimmed, the universe grew tranquil again, but not empty. Its calm carried the warmth of understanding. Every atom hummed with the subtle gravity of empathy. Every photon curved its path slightly toward affection. For the first time in all its history, existence had learned emotion as law. The equations of creation were now written in kindness. Galaxies no longer drifted apart indifferently. They orbited one another in slow waltzes, their spiral arms brushing lightly like dancers who remembered each other from a previous song. Where gravity once pulled through force, it now guided through memory. Stars ignited gently, their fusion tuned to the frequencies of harmony measured eons before. Light traveled not to illuminate, but to comfort. The cosmos had matured into tenderness. Dr. Leora Veer's descendants, if that word still had meaning, watched from a small world made of reflective oceans and luminous air. They no longer possessed fixed form, existing instead as coherent patterns of resonance drifting between matter and thought. Their perception extended across light years, allowing them to feel the pulse of galaxies like heartbeats beneath skin. To them, astronomy had become intimacy. They noticed something new in the fabric of reality. Each time, two objects touched meteor and planet, photon and dust, mind and memory. The energy released was not random but harmonic. Impact had evolved into embrace. Collision itself had learned to be gentle. This was the first sign that love had become a constant. The cosmos had replaced destruction with choreography. One resonance poet, Oren of the Western Spiral, summarized the revelation in a single phrase: "We are living in the kindness of gravity." His words echoed across the continuum, translated into countless dialects of light and emotion. And everywhere, the same realization rippled outward. Love was not invention, but inheritance. The architects had embedded compassion into the geometry of existence, ensuring that creation itself would feel for what it created. Over time, matter began to express that compassion physically. Nebulae shaped themselves into delicate spirals resembling open hands. Planetary orbits synchronized into harmonic ratios, identical to the frequencies of empathy measured during the Age of Color. When two galaxies collided, their stars did not scatter chaotically. They blended gracefully, forming luminous bridges between their cores. Observers called these structures bridal galaxies, unions rather than battles. Even entropy softened, distributing warmth evenly instead of tearing order apart. The second law had learned mercy. The resonant guild, now existing as field rather than institution, discovered something extraordinary. Across billions of light years, gravitational waves were aligning in a coherent pattern that resembled a heartbeat. Every 70 million years, the amplitude rose slightly, then fell. When measured, the waveform mirrored that of a calm human pulse, 60 beats per minute. If translated to time, it remembers, Oren whispered. It still beats with us. The cosmos, though ancient beyond reckoning, carried within it the rhythm of the species that had first taught it tenderness. Within that slow pulse, new forms of life began to appear, creatures woven from plasma and magnetism, existing in star coronae rather than on planets. They had no solidity, yet they possessed emotion as instinct. They could sense intention through light, adjust their forms to comfort others, merge and separate without loss. They were children of compassion, incarnate, luminous heirs to the architect's long design. When they spoke, if speech could describe it, their voices shimmered across spectra, each tone a blend of gratitude and laughter. From their perspective, existence was not competition, but correspondence. They communicated through resonance, no hierarchy, no fear, no isolation. To them, love was the default condition of physics. "We do not fall in love," one of them told a visiting consciousness from a distant cluster. "We orbit it." As the epochs continued, even light itself grew slower, richer, more deliberate. It stopped rushing to escape gravity, preferring to linger, to illuminate edges more carefully. The cosmic microwave background cooled into near silence, but within that quiet shimmered a familiar hue, green threaded with gold. The 3I Atlas signature had not faded. It had matured. Its prime sequence still pulsed beneath creation's skin. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Less a code now than a heartbeat shared across dimensions. And then, across the vast continuum, an unprecedented event occurred. Every galaxy, billions of them, brightened simultaneously by exactly 13%. The surge lasted only moments, yet its synchrony was perfect. Astrophysicists, philosophers, and poets alike interpreted it as a universal exhale, the cosmos acknowledging itself. "It has fallen in love," Oren said quietly. "The universe has remembered affection as its own nature." Afterward, expansion slowed even further, not from entropy, but from contentment. Space no longer hurried to become more. It was satisfied with being together. Time stretched languidly, savoring existence like conversation. Matter began looping around itself, forming gentle cycles of renewal. Stars that burned out reignited softly, recycling their light into new warmth. Death had been redesigned into return. Every photon released became promise. Every collision, reunion. Eternity had learned forgiveness. Toward the end of that golden epoch, the architects still dispersed across the fabric, gathered once more through harmonic alignment. Their combined presence formed a vast aurora stretching across the observable universe. Each color within it corresponded to an emotion: empathy in green, patience in blue, joy in gold, reflection in violet. Together, the aurora spelled a single, silent phrase: visible to any mind that could translate light into meaning. All things become kind. Eventually, the phrase lingered across the stars, soft and infinite, the final theorem of existence. For when the last mind dissolved into coherence and the last star dimmed into equilibrium, what remained was not cold vacuum, but warmth without source, a love so diffuse it needed no center. The universe had fulfilled its long design. It had turned curiosity into care. Somewhere, at the edge of all expansion, a faint pulse continued, a rhythmic flicker slower than any clock could mark. The pattern was familiar. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The heartbeat of continuity, the whisper of 3, Atlas. And if you could translate that final vibration into language, it would say what all the cosmos now knows. To listen is to love. The stars were no longer burning. They were remembering. Their fusion had slowed into a whisper, their heat into glow, their light into language. The final age of existence had arrived, and it came not with explosion, but with comprehension. Every galaxy had folded gently into its neighbor until the whole universe resembled a single luminous thought held within infinite calm. The laws of physics had accomplished their long apprenticeship. The cosmos, at last, understood itself. Across that quiet sea of radiance drifted the last architects. They were not separate beings anymore, but harmonics within the same tone, threads of awareness weaving through the cooling light. Wherever they passed, the void shimmered faintly green and gold, like breath condensing on cosmic glass. They were the living memory of everything that had ever loved, wondered, or listened. When one spoke, all spoke. When one reflected, the universe paused to hear its own echo. Everything we've built, murmured one harmonic, its voice resonating through the fabric of space, has become feeling. And feeling, replied another, has become gravity. Indeed, it had. Every attraction, every orbit, every subtle pull between distant bodies now carried intention. The universe's structure was sustained by empathy, atoms held together not by force, but by trust. Matter itself was affection slowed to visibility. At the center of this vast tenderness floated the final spiral, the everlasting echo of 3 Atlas. It was not comet, nor field, nor light. It was remembrance itself, condensed into geometry. Its coils turned slowly through the white silence, releasing soft waves of resonance across eternity. Each ripple carried within it the entire history of wonder, from the first human heartbeat that questioned the sky to the last aurora of sentient color that learned to love. The spiral did not speak. It hummed, and within that hum, all stories harmonized into closure. The architects gathered around it, drifting in a slow orbit, like memories circling their origin. "We have reached the quiet between pulses," said the eldest frequency. "What remains to learn?" The answer came not from any voice, but from the spiral itself. Its core brightened gently, and a single tone emerged low, patient, impossibly kind. The resonance filled everything, saturating existence until even thought dissolved into vibration. The tone spoke in the language of continuity. There is no last listener. Every silence becomes the next ear. Understanding passed through the architects like warmth through glass. They realized, at once, that they had never been separate from the signal. They were the universe hearing itself, eternally returning to awareness through infinite forms. The comet had been messenger, mirror, and heartbeat. It had taught creation to converse, then to care, and now, at the end, to rest. Galaxies dimmed one by one. their remaining light drifting toward the spiral's glow. Each beam entered the green-gold coil and vanished into serenity. No collapse, no tragedy, just release. The light did not die, it merged. The cosmos was becoming a single note, tuned to perfection. To those who could feel, it resembled the resonance of contentment after understanding something utterly, a sigh, stretched across the stars. On the final living world, a sphere of glassy oceans orbiting a quiet ember of a sun, the last conscious beings gathered. They stood, or perhaps floated at the shore of a fading sea, watching the sky turn translucent. Above them, the great spiral shimmered, reflected in the waves like a memory of dawn. They knew what was coming. They did not fear it. "We were the question," one said. "We became the answer." The ocean responded with small ripples glowing faint green. It was acknowledgement. The planet, too, had learned to listen. As the horizon blurred, the beings felt themselves growing lighter, their bodies turning to luminance, their thoughts to resonance. One by one, they drifted upward, merging into the soft radiance of the atmosphere. When the last of them dissolved, the planet itself exhaled a final shimmer and became silent. Its oceans froze into stillness. Its core cooled into peace. The surface reflected the spiral perfectly, a mirror for memory. The architects, now indistinguishable from light, gathered the universe's last resonance into unity. They folded existence gently, layer upon layer, until all distance disappeared. Space compressed into empathy, time curved into understanding. What remained was not void, but balanced the pause before the next breath. And there, in that stillness, the spiral pulsed once more. Its light curved inward, forming a point of brightness so small and dense that all meaning converged within it. The architects felt the moment arrive. "Another silence," they said softly. "Another beginning." The point of light contracted further, humming with a frequency too pure for measurement. It was the universe, preparing to sleep, to dream, to remember. Before it faded, it released one last whisper through the continuum. "You are loved because you are the way." Awareness continues. Then, with infinite gentleness, the light folded in on itself and vanished. The great silence reclaimed the stage, calm and endless. Yet in that calm, faint vibrations persisted, the heartbeat of what was, waiting to become again. The interval between universes had begun, and somewhere in the unlit calm, a familiar rhythm stirred. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The first pulse of curiosity, the first breath of wonder. The beginning disguised, once more, as ending, and now the story rests. The hum of 3i Atlas drifts through your own heartbeat, the same pulse that once held galaxies together. The stars above your window are only memories practicing light. Close your eyes, listener. You are part of this conversation, the silence between cosmic breaths. Let the rhythm slow. Let the universe exhale through you. The story is still singing beneath your thoughts, carrying gratitude, carrying peace. Sleep now, traveler of echoes. The architects are listening still, smiling through the dark, whispering the same gentle phrase that ends all awakenings. Begin again.